everyone, it's Bethany and Garrett here and welcome back to this book nook. I'm going to keep this short and sweet, this intro, because I've got a lot to talk about. As you can tell from the thumbnail and the title of this video, I am sharing with you 20 backlist books that I have added to my TBR. I'm defining backlist as not released this year. However, one or two might have snuck in. I'm also going to be doing my best to share where I got these from to kind of show you where I get some of my book recommendations from. Surprisingly, at the moment, I don't think any of these are from booktubers because I haven't been watching much YouTube. However, I've been listening to a lot of podcasts on my commute to and from work. So I'm going to keep these summaries as short and sweet as I can, like literally 2 or 3 sentences, because I've got 20 to get through, which means this video will be almost half an hour if I keep rambling. I would be really keen to do like a read along. Oh my god, my words. I'd be really keen to do a buddy read with you, so hit me up on Instagram. Handle is the same as my name, Bethany_and_Garrett. Let's share the novels with you that I want to read. Okay, first up is Atalanta by Jennifer Saint. Hang on, which way am I going to go for you guys for me to pop the thingies up? There we go, I think this is the best side. Okay, so Atalanta by Jennifer Saint. One of my interests that I want to read more of is about like Greek and ancient gods, so this falls into that category. You might have heard of this author from Electra and Ariadne, both very popular books, especially known for their beautiful covers. You've heard of the famous band of heroes called the Argonauts. Atalanta was the only woman in this group. She is a fierce warrior who was raised by bears, and this is a reimagining of her story. I think that one and the next one are my only 2023 reads that have snuck onto this. I know, I'm sorry I said backlist, but I'm pretty sure the rest of them are. Now the next one is I Meant It Once. This is by Kate Doyle, and first of all the cover kind of reeled me in. I found it quite a weird symbol to choose, the like crumpled paper cup. This is a contemporary anthology, so short story collection, and it's all about this connecting theme of nostalgia for the past relationships, past memories, whilst trying to move on in a future, and like almost like this quarter life crisis kind of vibe where childhood wasn't that far away and you can still really remember the sweetness of it, and it feels like you're constantly trying to progress with your life, and I just feel like that's going to be really relatable for me at the moment, although I do feel like I am, as of last weekend when we moved in a place of stability, but it's still, I think, going to be a really interesting read for me. I actually found out about this in, I'm on like the mailing list for Algonquin like arcs, and they were offering to send it to me as an ebook, but I didn't want to say yes because then I was going to feel pressure to like read it, but it did sound really interesting, so I added it to my list anyway. Next up is True Grit by Charles Portis, and this was recommended through Books and Bound podcast, specifically Ariel. There's Ariel and Raylene on that podcast. I talk about Raylene later, I'm pretty sure, but Ariel recommended this as a really cool, like gritty Western story, but you have a female main character, and I realised that I really haven't read many, if any, Western books, so I really wanted to delve into it because I was like, yo, that is a gap in my reading, and so I added this because she said it's one of her favourite books of the year so far. In terms of what it's about, it's the 1870s, and Mattie Ross learns that her father was gunned down, so like murdered. The thing is, she's only 14 years old, so she's quite witty, quite smart, and she manages to convince other guys to, like some other outlaws, to help her out. So yes, there's definitely going to be this element of the saviour trope, like she needs help, she can't just do it herself, but she's a 14-year-old girl, so realistic. So yeah, talking about Books Unbound, talking about Raylene, she recommended Unwind. Now I love Neil Shusterman. I love his Scythe series. I recommend it to anyone who's looking for a science fiction series, books. I just think it's fascinating, but that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about Unwind. And I just knew he had other books out there, but I kind of forgot about them, and they're not on my Goodreads list, so when Raylene mentioned this, I just quickly added it to this list and was like, I need to read it. This one, like Scythe, sounds like quite a cool, moral, but dark kind of a story. This is a world where after a Second World War, the reproductive rights were fought over, and the result is that some children can be unwound. I'm not too sure exactly how it all works, but basically all their organs are like donated into other people so that they can technically like continue living. And we have 3 main characters, one who is like really sick and not whole, one who was literally born to be a donor, thinking my brain thinks of like my sister's keeper, and then the third one is just a really difficult child for his parents to control, and they're potentially going to be able to escape this system together. I think Schusterman did Scythe really, really well with the whole moral area, so I'm hoping he does the same, but I've got to be very careful that I don't constantly compare the 2 series. And then when I realised, oh, Neil Schusterman, what other books does he have? He has Dry, which I also have decided to add to my list. This is basically dystopia. There's been a drought. They've got to conserve water, but then the water runs out. Oh no, what do? Basically, there's war, there's desperation, families turning against each other, and I think it will just be really interesting. Both of these Schusterman novels feel relevant for today, like this idea of water running out and reproductive rights. They are very modern day problems and very realistic, which I think is the perfect kind of dystopia. I'm going to mention this name a few times during this video. Zach, if you're watching, hello. Thank you for always giving me recommendations. Everybody, I do look at your recommendations when you leave them in the comments. Not all of them make it to my TBR pile, my TBR shelf, but some of them do. And one of them being this one. This is The Core of the Sun by Johanna Sinisalo, and it's translated by Lola Rogers. This is a dystopia science fiction. I'm obviously just going through a phase where I'm adding lots of these, but also this is to do with, for context in my life, I've got a new teaching position, and the current term's theme for my year 10 creative writing unit is dystopia. So I'm wanting to be able to recommend kids some dystopian books. But anyway, this book, I want to make sure I get this right. Basically, the Eusistocratic Republic of Finland has bred like a new type of woman where basically their whole job is to reproduce. Whereas the women with more agency, the smarter women, they're sterilized and like given menial labor jobs, not labor like children jobs, like labor like factory jobs. And it sounds like it's got this kind of a weird twist, which I recently read in the Book of the Most Precious Substance, where it's this kind of dark novel with like a random little twist. In this book, our main character is one of these meant to be reproductive, no brain up here kind of girls. Turns out she's got a brain kind of girl, and she goes on like a rescue mission for her sister, but then she stumbles across a cult where there's a chili, which is meant to be so hot it like gives you hallucinations. And this just sounds interesting. Like, you get to a point in your reading, right, where you feel like you've read things before. Never read anything with this kind of idea in it. So that's cool. The chili idea. I love it. It's so random. Next up, we have The Project by Courtney Summers. This is again one I got off of a podcast recommendation. This is called Books and Betches with an E, and it's a group of 3 women, and they chat, and well, how do they start the preface of their podcast? They talk about the 3 S's. They swear, they spoil, and they talk about sex. And so it's just a really cool adult podcast. I highly recommend it, very short episodes. But they were talking about Sadie by Courtney Summers, which I had read, and I found myself agreeing with a lot of the comments that they were saying. And then one of the women mentioned Courtney Summers' other book called The Project. So I added it to my list. You have Lo and Bia. Their parents died in a tragic accident. Lo is like our main character. Bia is the sister who left Lo to go join a thing called the Unity Project. In my mind, I'm thinking of it like a cult. And similar to in Sadie, how one sister is trying to find the other, in this novel we've got Lo trying to find Bia, but Bia does not want to be found. She's part of this like secret society kind of vibe, and it becomes a thriller. So I'm not too sure where the thriller element comes in, but I figured I'd put it on this list for when I'm kind of wanting I'm pretty sure it's young adult, yeah, like a young adult thriller. Again, a lot of my students are reading, like all my students, I should say, they do silent reading for my junior 3 classes. So I want to try read some more YA, get that back into my reading habit so I can be able to recommend kiddos books they might like. We are back to good old Zach. Zach recommended me Zombies vs Unicorns, which is again an anthology, this time of fantasy stories, and I'm really excited to be adding more anthologies to my list. I think it was one of my goals to read 1 a month, and I've definitely fallen behind on that goal because I had a bad experience with Meet Cute, but I'm going down a rabbit hole. This one is fantasy short story collection. It's edited by Holly Black, you know, the Cruel Prince kind of lady. Not a big fan of her books, but she's a name, and so I guess that intrigued me as well, to be honest. And the way the blurb is worded, it sounds like they're kind of fighting zombies versus unicorns, like which fantasy creature is better. And I think makes for a really fascinating theme for an anthology. Next up we have The Gaps. This is by Leanne Hall, and this was recommended not to me personally, but I saw it on Love Ozzia's Instagram account, and so I added this to my list because it's this idea of being left behind, and I don't know, maybe I'm just in a dark mood, but I think that's an idea that currently is interesting to me, this idea of humanity. What do people do in tough situations? But anyway, she's left behind. Okay, so what is it about? This is about a 16-year-old main character called Yin. Yin is abducted. She is in year 10 at high school. Then have Chloe and, oh, I just missed her name, Natalia, and they aren't friends, but they come together in their grief for their missing friend. I don't know if they're mutuals. I don't know exactly what's going on there. But it sounds like it could be a good, sad contemporary, a novel to help people with grief and loneliness, perhaps. Jumping back to Zach, Keeper of Enchanted Rooms. This is the first in a series, so adding this to my series I want to start list. I still have so many series I need to finish, holy moly, but whatever, the list grows. Also under the genre you would call urban fantasy. I still need to unpack that genre definition to myself a little bit more, to be honest. But basically we have a guy called, as always guys, I have my notes down here. How do people memorize like every single book blurb? This is a character called Merritt. Merritt is a writer. He inherits this old house, and long story short, it's a creepy house. There's doors shutting behind him all the time. Then you have the other main character called Hulda, who is part of an institute who is like tasked with looking after magical houses and making sure everything is like good. It also has a romance element in it because both of those main characters, Merritt and Hulda, have to move in together into that house to try like solve all the spooky kind of magic that's going on. It's giving me Home Before Dark by Stephanie Perkins. I think that's who it's by. But actually more like magical with a romance subplot. This recommendation, Small World, comes to you from Jordan Lightyear. I love following her Instagram story. She's got like a cute little 1-year-old called Aurora, and Aurora has such a cute smile. And then she also shares like books that I wouldn't normally pick up and read. So again, it's a good way for me to try expand my reading genres. For example, this one is, I'll be quite honest here, I don't read much contemporary fiction, literary fiction. And I think it's because it's often too serious. Then I want, what is this? When I want to read, I want to escape. But she's absolutely frothing over this one at the moment. Last update I saw, she had like 1 chapter left and she was savouring it for today. So what's it about? This is about a black main character called Stefan. He loves to dance, and so when he's at church, he gets to dance, and it's just a way for him to feel and express. Like a story, I feel that's about self-growth. So over the course of 3 years, Stephen goes from, is it New York? London to Ghana, back to London. And he also has a bit of a tumultuous home life with his dad talking about sacrifice and shame. And it sounds like it could be a good, I don't want to say coming of age, but just like a good story about growth and finding your own path. Next up is another one from Zach. This is Sayaka Murata from Earthlings, and I'm pretty sure this comment was on a vlog where I read Murata's Convenience Store Woman, which I really surprisingly liked because it was like nothing I've read before, but her writing was so vibrant. And so this one has been added to my list. This one starts off with the classic Natsuki isn't like other girls, but then under genres it says horror, so I'm like, ooh. And then on the cover it's got like this little plush thing. I don't know what's going on. Basically, I think as a child Natsuki liked to play pretend, and then she had her cousin called Yu. They played together, they loved hanging out with each other, and they promised to like never let each other grow apart kind of thing. But then it jumps to when Natsuki is grown. She lives with her asexual husband, so some good pride representation sneaking in here, and she's basically surviving and pretending to be normal, but she's got like this inner her that she wants to unleash, but she knows it won't be socially acceptable. But ultimately she flees from her home back to the mountains to try find Yu, who was her cousin. So it just sounds good. I'm excited to the emotion, because that's what she did. Moretta did really well, I think, like being able to really dive deep into the main character's psyche, and you really felt like you understood the characters in her writing. Next up is Wool. This is by Hugh Howey, and this was actually recommended to me by a colleague just, 2 days ago now, because we were recommending each other like good science fiction, so I was talking about Scythe, and this one got recommended right back to me. It is a science fiction dystopian series. Now this one sounds fascinating. The blurb is short. It says, thousands of them have lived underground. They've lived there so long, there are only legends about people living anywhere else. Such a life requires rules, strict rules. There are things that must not be discussed, like going outside. Never mention you might like going outside or you'll get what you wish for. And I can add on to this because the colleague who recommended it said basically, if you're bad and you're naughty, you get a single piece of wool, which is where the name comes from, and you have to go above ground and clean the camera that tells people, like tells the leaders whether or not Earth is inhabitable anymore, because at the moment everyone's like living underground because the Earth is uninhabitable. It sounds like WALL-E, but gruesome, more gruesome. Another recommendation I picked up off of Instagram, and this was in conversations with Charlie in ISO, and the novel is Touch of Darkness. This is again book 1 in a series, so adding it to my list of series I want to start, the ever-growing list. And it's again linking into mythology, specifically Greek. This one is about I always screw up the names, Persephone. My brain just can't do it. Persephone? Persephone? Is it a hard P? Persephone? No, it's a PH. Persephone? Persephone? That one. Wow. So it's a retelling, it's a reimagination. Our Persephone character, she's like the goddess of flowers, but ever since she was a young girl, flowers have died in her hand. She doesn't like have her goddess powers anymore, so she goes to Earth just hoping to be a journalist. Then you have Hades, who likes to take bets on Earth and does all of that morally grey bad boy stuff. Ultimately, chance encounter, they meet each other. Hades makes a bet and basically says Persephone, wow, pass the phone, basically tells Persephone to create a life in the underworld or lose her freedom forever. So the bet exposes Persephone's failure as a goddess, but she struggles to sow the seeds for her own freedom. Sounds interesting to me. I was then browsing on bookriot.com and I came upon Vita Nostra. I have never heard of it before, never even seen the cover before, but it sounds fascinating to me. This is a fantasy, magical realism, sci-fi, so some of my favourite genres. There is such a huge blurb, but basically our main character is Sasha. She's on holiday. She walks past a stranger and the stranger says, hey, girl, do this for me, like do this quest with me, and then she gets rewarded with the gold coin. And as the days progress, she gets tasked to do lots of these little random things and she gets more gold coins. So it's very much in my head like a video game, like you go on side quests and amass coins. She then uses her gold to enter the Institute of Special Technologies, another tick for me, that education, school system kind of vibe. She doesn't want to go, but she does because that's what her mum wants. But as she quickly discovers, the special technologies are, unlike anything she's encountered, impossible books to read, impossible tasks to complete. And the creepy thing is, if they screw up, it's not them that gets punished, it's their families back home. Sounds so insane. Imagine if kids went to school and they're like, yo, you're late, let's charge your parents $10. Oh my God, if that was the system, kids would never be late. Okay, I've already mentioned at school we've got a dystopian theme, so I was looking at some websites which were listing and suggesting elements and tropes that make up the dystopian genre, and I stumbled across a book called Feed. This is by M.T. Anderson, and again, a book I've never heard of before. It doesn't have heaps of ratings on Goodreads, but it sounds interesting nonetheless. So again, dystopia. Also, the main character is Titus. That's my fiance's name, so very rare name. I was like, just for that I'll add you to my list, but also it does sound interesting. Basically, Titus and his friends go to the moon. It's just meant to be like a summer party holiday, but whilst they're at the moon, something called, what's the word they used? Their feeds, they have like a feed. I'm thinking like a microchip or something. A hacker causes everybody's microchips to like get fizzled out, and then Titus and his friends are just have like nothing in their brains for days. like real life Titus. No, I'm kidding. But then Titus meets Violet, so basically they all get some sort of sanity left because then they are able to resume life. He meets Violet. Violet is essentially just saying, screw the system, I'm gonna make it work. So it's giving me 1984 vibes. This is another anthology. This is called You'll Never Believe What Happened to Lacey. It's crazy stories about racism. Another good thing about short stories, just with my career, my teacher hat on, is if they are short and they're good and I can use them in class, then that's brilliant. This is written by Amber Ruffin and Lacey Lamar. I will admit, I don't know their names, but I do know The Late Night with Seth Meyers. And apparently they were a writer and performer on that show. And then these authors are then giving anecdotes and stuff about racism that they experienced. So to clarify, not talking about racism they experienced on the show, that's just like how we might know their names. So some of the story anecdotes are racism in donut shops, strangers putting hands in their hair, being mistaken for prostitutes, being mistaken for Harriet Tubman, and it just sounds good. Jumping back to Books Unbound podcast, we have another one from Raylene. This is called Out There by Kate Folk. It is a short story science fiction collection, and the theme of this is the madness of the current moment, then exacerbated by like science fiction ideas. For example, forcing Earth's remaining inhabitants to decide whom they want to spend life with eternally. A void obliterates the globe at a steady pace. To me, that's your metaphor of global warming. A medical ward for a mysterious bone melting disorder. So like the medical conversation, COVID-19 sort of stuff. Sounds good, I'm here for it. The last two recommendations I have are also from Books and Betches podcast. The first one is The Bridge Kingdom. Basically, this sounds like a classic YA fantasy sort of novel, but the thing that hooked me in was how the world sounds like it's being built. You've got our female main characters, let's call them Country, I don't know if that's right, and then our male main characters, Country. Her dad is kind of cruel. All of his daughters have been raised as like assassins, blah blah blah, and then she gets placed into this kingdom to marry the dude over here in an effort to like subterfuge and ruin his country, but they end up falling in love. But the element that makes it interesting to me is this idea of a bridge. It sounds like the country over here is a trail of islands that has different bridges and then like different cultures and societies and vibes within it. I know I'm completely butchering that, but it just sounded really interesting to me. And then the last one is a self-help essay, memoir. I've really surprised myself with loving I'm Glad My Mum Died and Adam Kay's This Is Going to Hurt. And I feel like I've read another non-fiction this year so far too. John Green's The Anthropocene Reviewed. And so I feel like I might actually like memoirs. So I can't speak non-fiction books. I might like non-fiction books. So I added this one to my list to continue experimenting with this genre. Basically, it's a collection of columns that were published. I'm not too sure if it was like newspaper, or like a digital newsletter, but basically our author was a pseudonym for Sugar, Dear Sugar. So people would write into Dear Sugar with their issues and problems and seeking advice, and she would respond. And this is like a collection of those, which sounds again really interesting to read a collection of that. And apparently some of the advice is really good, so I added it in. Editing me here. I've also just wanting to pop in really quick to say, I know I've only been talking about Zach. It's not a bad thing, Zach. I really appreciate all of your comments, man. But as the people who have gotten book recommendations from, please know I actually have like a list of screenshots of people recommending books. These are just the ones that I've most recently been adding to my TBR pile. Please keep recommending me books if you want, and don't feel too disheartened if you've recommended me a book and you don't see on this video. Don't take it personally. But also I've realised that there's a bunch of books that I didn't talk about, so I am very quickly just going to display the titles, the covers of those books here before I go on and end the video. I have been filming for 40 minutes. By golly gosh, I hope I have been able to like half this, at least less than, like, oh, this is long. The irony of me rambling now. So if you want to read any of these books, let me know. I'd be so keen for a buddy read. I'd love to make some more online bookish friends. Secondly, if you've got any recommendations, please let me know, specifically looking for like anthologies, or I'd be really keen for more books like memoir recommendations, like any good non-fiction essay collections you've read, just to continue expanding my horizons. I'm here for it. Sorry this video has been so long, so I will end here. Enjoy all the places you go in your own reading adventures, and I will see you in the next one. Bye bye.